Yeah, I'm going to get us started right away, actually, because we've got a lot to cover, and I do want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. But let me first just briefly introduce myself. I am Elsa Ordway. I'm an assistant professor at UCLA in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, and I'm the PI of a NASA scoping effort called PANGEA, which is what I'm going to talk to you all about today. And thanks to ESA for hosting this. And it seems like it's being recorded, which is great. So we will make sure we get that recording from them. Can I get a confirmation that that's going to be possible so that we can put that on our website?
100%.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, host, can you please also enable screen sharing? And I'm going to share some slides here. I still am, there we go, awesome. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Maybe just a thumbs up. Cool, thanks, Carissa. Okay, so thank you for joining us. I am going to go through a ton of information fairly quickly because, like I said, I do want to make sure we have time for questions. We have a lot of information on our website as well, and we'll make sure this is recorded. And mostly this is hopefully an opportunity to give you all an overview of what PANGEA is and how you might be able to get involved. So PANGEA, which stands for the Pan-Tropical Investigation of Biogeochemistry and Ecological Adaptation, is a one-year scoping effort. So this is not a funded campaign yet. We're hoping to get funding for a campaign. We have funding from NASA for 1 year to scope a possible campaign. And I'll tell you more about what that means. So today I want to talk about what PANGEA is, what it actually means to scope a NASA tropical ecology field campaign and some past examples of those types of campaigns. And we'll move towards how you all can get involved if you're interested. And like I said, I'm really hoping we can save enough time at the end here for discussion and questions. In the meantime, please check out our website. There's a QR code here on the left for that. There's also a Google Jamboard. So if you go to that website, let me, maybe Isaac, you can even drop the links to these two things in the chat. Isaac Aguiar, I also want to shout out, is our project coordinator. So thanks to Isaac very much for your help throughout. And if folks do have questions about things, also feel free to drop them in the chat and Isaac can help. Our Google Jamboard is an opportunity for you to just post ideas. We probably won't have enough time for a ton of discussion and questions, just knowing how these things go. And there's always more to discuss beyond what we have time for. So please drop ideas, thoughts, suggestions in the Google Jamboard as well. And please feel free to follow up with us afterwards. I also want to emphasize that PANGEA has laid out community guidelines to be followed at all times. This includes these kinds of webinars. We also have a Slack channel. We also have working group activities and workshops that we're doing. And these are community guidelines and codes of conduct that are defined by the UCLA and the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And you can find more information on our website too. This is also massively a team effort. So I am here presenting as PI of this project, but we have many folks who are on the leadership team who come with a huge amount of experience in field and airborne campaigns and satellite remote sensing missions. And we also are working with a lot of folks who are leading our working groups now, which I'll talk briefly about a little bit later. We also have funding support, of course, from NASA, but from a lot of other funding agencies as well, because even with a scoping effort that I'll talk about, NASA can only fund certain components of this. And for something to be as international as this is, we've gone kind of above and beyond to try to get additional funding support to support participation of collaborators from tropical countries. And we also have a lot of institutional partners. And so what this means, as you hear more about what this scoping process is, we're really trying to build on existing efforts. There's a lot of work already being done in the tropics. We're not going to try to reinvent the wheel or start from scratch. And we see this as an opportunity to actually bring folks together to enhance collaboration and coordination. So we are actively adding to this list of partners with the goal of trying to engage different parts of the research community to make sure this is as coordinated as possible. Okay, before I really talk about what PANGEA is, I want to motivate why the tropics are so important. I'm sure this won't be completely new for many of you, but the tropics are critically important ecosystems for a lot of reasons. They cover less than 10% of the ice-free land surface, yet they maintain over 2/3 of all species on the planet, and they're home to over 3 billion people. These systems are also critical carbon and water and heat pumps. They contribute enormously to both local and regional and global climate systems. And they're also incredibly important for the global carbon cycle. So this figure here is showing latitude actually on the y-axis and a couple different estimates of carbon biomass stocks on the x-axis. And at around the equator, you can see this huge bump regardless of different kind of actual or potential estimates of carbon stocks according to this study. And it's well known that there's a huge amount of carbon stocks in the tropics, both above and below ground. And there's also a huge amount of productivity. So these systems account for about 30% of all terrestrial net primary productivity. These ecosystems and the people living in them are also undergoing rapid change. So these systems are entering what we call a no analog state. They're compositionally different than anything found today and increasingly move into that direction under future climate change. Temperatures are soon going to be hotter than most tropical ecosystems have experienced in their evolutionary history, and there's massive questions about what that means for species in these systems, whether it's going to influence range shifts, adaptation, acclimation. They're also undergoing a huge amount of change as a result of agriculture and cropland and pastureland expansion. 80% of forest conversion globally is a result of deforestation happening in the tropics. And this agricultural production, which is also critically important for food security and demands coming from all over the world, is going to be influenced by feedbacks associated with this same climate change, influencing temperatures, but also rainfall patterns, which are directly influenced by local cycles, local feedbacks in these systems. Increasingly, there's evidence that tropical structure and function is going to be greatly diminished by the end of the century, contributing to even further feedbacks. But in spite of this, the importance of these systems and the rapid and vast change that's happening, we still lack basic knowledge about these systems. This is just an example of a spread of Earth system models predicting the cumulative land flux out to the end of the century. And these are models that differ in a variety of ways, but they don't even agree on the same sign by the end of the century. So some models predict that terrestrial systems could actually continue to store carbon. Some models predict that these systems could be emitting carbon by the end of the century. And from other research, we know that the greatest amount of uncertainty in these models is concentrated in model uncertainty in the tropics. So this is looking at NEP trend variability from different model predictions with latitude now on the x-axis, and there's 3 times greater uncertainty in model predictions in the tropics than at other latitudes. If we're thinking about observations of these systems, this is a paper that looked at orbiting carbon observatory data over the tropics in response to the 2015 El Nino event, which led to really extreme conditions all over the world, but and especially in the tropics. And all of these continents actually switched from being carbon sinks to carbon sources after this event. But this study, led by Jinji Liu in 2017 in Science, indicated that that was potentially for very different reasons. So in the Americas, a drier land surface resulted in less plant growth and more carbon dioxide emissions. In Africa, it was higher temperatures that resulted in increased plant respiration that led to more CO2. And in Southeast Asia, it was hotter and drier conditions that interacted with land use change and fires that resulted in greater fire emissions or greater CO2 emissions. But these kind of satellite scale integrated observations are slightly different or contradictory to results that ground field plots data are indicating are happening. So these are 2 different studies using forest inventory plot data in the Amazon and Africa on the left, and then just Africa on the right. And these are in intact forest ecosystems. So in the previous slide, you're seeing the integrated effect of the entire system. And this is just looking at intact forest systems. And these field measurements indicate that on the left, we're seeing increases in tree mortality that's leading to a weakening of the carbon sink in the Amazon, which is the brownish gray line here. Whereas over the past 3 decades, the same time period, the African carbon sink has been more stable. But this paper suggests that there could be a lag, and it could just be an indication of a more vulnerable carbon sink in the Amazon, whereas African carbon sinks may catch up to that. It's just happening over a lagged period. Whereas this paper on the right suggests that looking specifically at forest plots in Africa in response to the same El Nino period as that orbiting carbon observatory paper, suggests that although the carbon sink did weaken, it was persistent and it remained a sink in these intact forests after this El Nino event. And so we're getting these different stories from these forest inventory plot data compared to these satellite measurements and these observations. And there's a need to reconcile these differences and also, I think, better capture the heterogeneity in these systems to understand how these different tropical forests are going to respond in different ways to climate change and land use change. So that's where PANGEA comes in. So PANGEA is a proposed campaign that would work across scales to better understand different responses and different mechanistic underpinnings to continental and subcontinental responses to climate change and land use change across the tropics. And the nature of these campaigns is multi-scale. So they integrate across in situ measurements, tower measurements, airborne, both drone and aircraft data collection, with the ultimate goal of improving our ability to utilize satellite remote sensing to understand these systems, recognizing that we need to do this scaling work to better leverage these satellite remote sensing data sets. Modeling is also a key component of this as well. So the question, the big picture question we put forth with this, this proposed campaign is to understand how climate change and land use change are impacting the vulnerability and resilience of tropical forests across time and space. And this is pulled directly from the solicitation. So about a year ago, NASA put out the solicitation to request calls for proposals for what the next decadal field campaign should be that NASA will fund. And in the solicitation, they emphasize the need for these field campaigns to answer big science questions targeted on important regions or biomes, to enable more effective interpretation and analysis of space-based measurements, to foster collaborative interactions and build new relationships within the scientific community, to provide valuable opportunities for training and educating the next generation of scientists, and to leave a legacy of data of great value for future research. So what does it mean to actually scope this? We've got 1 year to engage the research community to take that big picture question and identify more targeted scientific research priorities and opportunities, to build relationships across the research community and define shared goals that we think should come out of a campaign like this if it is to be funded, to further refine and define the geographic scope. We're talking about pan-tropical, but we can't actually get on the ground in every single place. So we have to target specific locations. I'll come back to that later. And we have a big emphasis on campaign feasibility. So of course, NASA is not going to fund something that's completely infeasible. So we're trying to strike this balance between something that is an important set of important, compelling science questions with something that's actually tractable. And it's also important to note that 2 scoping proposals were funded. So we were funded, PANGEA, and there's also a proposal that was funded called ARID. So the ARID team, led by Sasha Reed at the USGS, is carrying out a similar activity over the course of this year, and I'd encourage you to take a look at their effort as well. This is a real opportunity to engage in something that could define the next decade of funding opportunities through NASA and potentially other funding agencies. So both our team and the ERA team will be delivering white papers to NASA at the end of this year and at the very end of November or the first week of December. And it's that white paper that will outline what we think our campaigns should accomplish. And then NASA will take a look at those and determine they'll fund one or both or neither. We don't know. So we're trying to engage as many people as we can to really put forth the most compelling campaign possible to convince NASA that it's worth funding. If it gets funded, it would fund a 6 to 9 year campaign that again would work across likely NASA programs. This is coming from the Terrestrial Ecology program, but we're engaging with program managers in biodiversity, in land cover land use change, and a lot of the applied sciences and hydrology. We're also, again, talking to other funding agencies to get support for this if it is to be funded. So moving a little bit more deeply into what PANGEA is, again, this is a 1-year effort to scope a large-scale research and capacity building campaign to better understand how Earth's tropical terrestrial ecosystems are responding to global change. This is inherently interdisciplinary, and it's also inherently multi-scalar. So we're proposing something that would coordinate across surface, airborne, and spaceborne observations with local to global ramifications. So we're really talking about working, again, across field sites, flux towers, coordinating that with airborne data collection, and ultimately using that to support improved remote sensing, satellite remote sensing and modeling capabilities. This scaling from leaf to landscape is an important part of all of these different field campaigns that NASA has conducted in the past. So NASA has a history of supporting Fife, Boreas, LBA, and above. I'll talk about the 2 more recent campaigns briefly, LBA and above. So the above campaign, the Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment, is currently wrapping up. It's been going on for roughly the last 10 years, focusing on understanding the Arctic systems that span the US and Canada, thinking about causes of change, changes to ecosystems, ecosystem services, and implications and changes to social systems. And again, scaling is a key component of this work, working from ground measurements to flux tower, airborne drone, satellite scales, and also with modeling. The above campaign has had a huge success with respect to data collection and peer-reviewed publications. There's some information here, and I would highly encourage you to check out their website, above.nasa.gov. It's an enormous undertaking, and it speaks to the power of the collaborative nature of these types of campaigns and the broad participation that becomes possible with these kinds of campaigns funded by NASA. LBA occurred prior to above. This was the large-scale biosphere atmosphere experiment in Amazonia. And so this started in the 1990s. It was actually led by Brazil. And NASA got involved in LBA under a part of LBA called LBA Eco. And it was actually the NASA Terrestrial Ecology and Land Use and Land Cover Change programs, as well as the hydrology program, actually, that sponsored that component of LBA. And it was the largest coordinated regional Earth system science study. The overarching LBA science questions were to better understand how Amazonia functions as a regional entity. So it was kind of the first time that hydrologists, atmospheric scientists, ecologists, land use change scientists came together to understand the system as a functioning entity. The LBA Eco NASA question that was embedded within this broader project was to understand how tropical forest conversion, regrowth, and selective logging influence carbon storage, nutrient dynamics, trace gas fluxes, and the prospect for sustainable land use in Amazonia. Now, this effort was hugely important on improving and advancing the science, but it was also incredibly well known for its successes in capacity building, which is something we're excited to continue to build on with PANGEA. So LBA trained over 1,000 students, about 500 of which were PhD students and master's students from Brazil. So this was an entire kind of cohort of researchers that were trained through LBA that have since gone on to be leaders in a lot of their fields and leading institutions and universities today. And again, this is something that we see as a major opportunity to continue with thinking about a pan-tropical campaign that would have the opportunity to really support the training of the next generation of scientists from these countries. So we had LBA. Why do we need another campaign in the tropics? Well, LBA started 25 years ago. The world has changed dramatically. Climate is changing rapidly. When LBA started, a lot of the research was focused on how tropical forests are changing and also just the basic functioning of tropical forests. We're now in a position where changes are happening so rapidly. There's really important dynamics that we couldn't have even understood at the time of LBA that are incredibly pressing today. The science and technology has also advanced, which is a big opportunity for PANGEA. So we're in a data-rich era for satellite observation compared to when LBA began in the 1990s, which was really kind of just the beginning of this greenness era. And I'll come back to that briefly. So we're arguing for a pan-tropical campaign. And again, it's really to leverage the emphasis across the tropics on understanding how different tropical forests will respond differently, and also leveraging this really huge wealth of remote sensing data that we currently are getting access to or will have access to in the coming years, but currently have major data gaps in the region. So advances in remote sensing are changing the way we can map and measure and model and monitor ecosystems globally. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. So this is just a schematic showing many of the Earth system sensors that are out there, the Earth observing satellites that are out there from NASA currently and forthcoming. And the European Space Agency and many other space agencies across the world also contribute to this with many additional satellite sensors. We're moving from these systems, these sensors that are the size of a bus to the size of a shoebox. We have amazing advances in technologies. We also have amazing advances in the actual sensors and the types of data we can retrieve. One of our leadership team members, Dana Chadwick, does a lot of work at JPL with the EMIT and other imaging spectroscopy sensors. And this is just an example of the power of what you can do going from this forest in Peru, which is a carpet of green, to understanding this system for the variation that it actually is. This is actual data showing variation in the spectral reflectance of the system, which corresponds to and can be used as a proxy for understanding things like plant traits and how those vary across the landscape. This kind of mapping using hyperspectral data to map plant traits, functionally distinct forest types, and tree species in the Amazon has been done before, but only in specific locations at snapshots in time. And so we really have this opportunity with forthcoming data sets to have these kinds of data all across the globe. But if you get into the detail of the methods, we really need co-located, coincidence, comparable ground measurements to use these data for the kinds of ecological applications that I think many people on this call would be interested in. And that's the kind of thing that PANGEA can contribute to. So one of the sensors I'm referring to is the Surface Biology Geology mission, which is a forthcoming satellite mission. There's also the existing and forthcoming active sensors. So we have spaceborne LiDAR now through the JEDI mission. We also have spaceborne radar that's coming online soon through the NISAR mission, which is in partnership with the Indian Space Agency. And we'll have a complementary satellite called Biomass from the European Space Agency. So these are going to transform the way we can understand and map and monitor terrestrial systems, including across the tropics. We're also at a point now where we have what some people refer to as these flux towers in the sky. So we have these capabilities with sensors like the Orbiting Carbon Observatory, which I mentioned earlier, as well as ecostress, to understand things like evapotranspiration and different aspects of plants, terrestrial systems that are related to fluxes of these systems. And that in combination with long-term archives that have now, had decades of data acquired, really put us in a position to understand these systems in a fundamentally different and more detailed way. There's also an opportunity where I think quite a few people, but still a small number, are really starting to work at the cutting edge of integrating ancillary data sets with these types of satellite remote sensing data sets. And so you can think about eDNA, camera traps data set, animal movement data set, these other data sets that are collected on the ground that might allow us to integrate information about certain taxa that we can't directly sense with remote sensing data, but still may provide very interesting and important information for understanding these systems in a more holistic way. So PANGEA is really hoping to build on LBA, which kind of came out of this greenness remote sensing era, but moving beyond that to think about the many new sensors that we have that can get at the additional dimensionality of these systems, thinking about measuring biodiversity, carbon, and agriculture across these systems in ways that allow us to get directly at structure and function, and recognizing the importance of ground measurements to be able to do this. We cannot get at these understanding these systems without understanding what we're seeing with these satellite data. And we also need to very carefully calibrate and validate any sorts of measurements that we're pulling from these remote sensing data sets, which requires ground measurements, which a campaign like this would support. So as I try to quickly wrap us to a close here in the hopes that we can have some time for Q&A, the overarching questions for PANGEA are focused on trying to think about what the similarities and differences are within and between tropical regions, how the vulnerability and resilience of tropical forest ecosystems are changing with global change, and how this information can be used to guide decision-making for climate adaptation and mitigation and biodiversity conservation. So we've got several science themes that we're parsing this out into. It's covering a lot, and we're organizing it into science and knowledge gaps and abilities for PANGEA to contribute to those knowledge gaps through biogeochemical cycles and carbon dynamics, ecosystem structure, function, and biodiversity, climate feedbacks and interactions, social ecological systems, and modeling and data assimilation, or as our working group is now moving towards calling it, data synthesis. And we have working groups that are actively involved in trying to define what these knowledge gaps are and how PANGEA could or should contribute to closing those knowledge gaps. So this is one space in which I would encourage anybody interested to get involved, and we can happily share more information about these working group activities. Their co-leads are up on our website, and you're welcome to reach out to me or Isaac directly. We also have these 3 cross-cutting working groups beyond the science themes focused on understanding and assessing the feasibility, the community engagement, and the research and applications output of PANGEA. So in terms of next steps, again, we're working really hard to try to engage as many folks as we can across the tropical research community, as well as here in the US and in Europe. We want to spend the rest of this year coming up with the most pressing and feasible science questions that we think PANGEA can contribute to addressing. And again, we need to further define the geographic scope and identify possible field sites. We're also very interested in using this as an opportunity to create a research environment that supports historically marginalized voices, researchers, and communities. And an additional hope is that PANGEA and the research that would come out of it would contribute to guiding societal responses to land cover change and climate change in the tropics. Now, I just want to quickly mention the super sites approach that we're taking, and it's really coming back to this emphasis on building on existing efforts. So this is a paper that came out a couple of years ago that was led by the forestplots.net community, which includes the rainfor and Afrotron plots. For those who are familiar, these are forest inventory plots across the tropics. And it's an example of an amazing community of people who are from a lot of these places and contribute to the data collection and the data analysis. And this is exactly the kind of effort we want to build on and engage with. And so it's the very features that enhance tropical forests' ecological values, such as the remoteness, the diversity, the high rainfall that make fieldwork challenging. This is coming directly from this paper. The power of new collaborative networks and a coordinated effort, I would say, like PANGEA, to transform tropical science with respect to what we do, how we do it, and who does it to understand these systems is critical. And so this forestplots.net network is focused on forest plots data collection that involves species identity, tree growth, mortality, carbon dynamics. And we're talking about engaging with those forest plots communities and flux tower communities and many, many, many other research communities across the tropics. So a part of what we're doing is identifying possible sites that would be the focal areas for this campaign. And so this is the super site approach. So we're trying to identify super sites that exist where there's existing infrastructure and plot data that could be supplemented or reinforced. And these would be opportunities to look across intact, log, degraded systems, as well as human landscapes, agroecosystems. And again, the opportunity for PANGEA would be to reinforce those efforts by supporting additional ground, drone, and airborne observations. So our timeline here is working towards this white paper that we'll be submitting to NASA at the end of November, beginning of December. And we're spending this year really pushing through working group activities. So that's a big opportunity to get involved. We'll have a workshop in Washington, D.C., April 9th through 11th, with more information on our website. You can register on our website as well. That's fully hybrid. So there's going to be a remote Zoom option for that. And I'd encourage everyone to attend if interested. And we'll be doing local regional workshops as well. So we just had a big workshop in Cameroon to engage with about 90 researchers from sub-Saharan Africa, primarily from the Central African region. We'll have a couple workshops in the Americas, and I'll likely be getting out to Southeast Asia as well. We'll have a special session at ATBC and EGU. And so I highly, highly encourage you to get involved. If you go to our website, there's a form you can fill out, and you can also reach out to Isaac and myself directly. So with that, I am going to pause with, I think, 15 minutes or so left for questions, comments, ideas. And maybe Isaac, you can help me navigate the chat too. So at this point, I'd say, I know that was a fire hose of information, and we'll make this recording available online. But if anybody does have questions, thoughts, ideas, please feel free to drop those in the chat, or also just raise your hand and share. And there's also I'll put the Jamboard link in the chat again as well. So that's an opportunity to just put ideas down if you don't feel like sharing in the form of question.
So this is Chip. Can you say a little bit more about some of the feedback that you received during the African consultation?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had a lot of folks from the research community and some folks from the practitioner community there. I think really quickly before going into some of their feedback, one of the ways I describe PANGEA is that we're really trying to tackle 3 different pillars. So first, advancing the science. Second, training the next generation of scientists from the region. And third, actually advancing monitoring capabilities around carbon, biodiversity, and agriculture. And there was a lot of interest across all of those domains. There's a lot of interest in supporting capacity building that goes beyond just data collection. So I think LBA did this really well in supporting researchers who went through master's or PhD programs to participate in research projects so that they're getting experience beyond just data collection to actually support data analysis, publication, grant writing skills. And so that's something where we got a lot of really resounding support for that emphasis. We also got a lot of interest in thinking about where kind of low-hanging fruit opportunities exist for filling in data gaps. A lot of weather station data is lacking in the African region, as well as flux tower data. And there's a lot of coordinated efforts to build that out right now. And so identifying synergies between PANGEA and those efforts is kind of a really easy possible win. There was a lot of emphasis also on engaging with governments, right? So this is unlike PANGEA, unlike LBA, which was really Brazil focused, and unlike Above, which is Canada and the US, this would be potentially working across many countries. So an emphasis on engaging with people to connect with their communities, whether it's their research community, their local governments, their federal governments, other institutions, the more we can support you all to get additional information out there to get support that would allow for something like this to happen if it gets funded is going to be really important. So, for example, coming out of that workshop in Cameroon, we shared summary reports of the workshop and the findings with many different ministries in the region, and we'll continue to do that as we have these workshops we're going to have one in Brazil and one in Peru, and meetings in Southeast Asia. And so if any of you are interested in participating in those, or even gathering information to share with your research communities, that's another way to get involved. Another thing that was brought up quite a bit was our working group on community engagement is thinking a lot about this. How do we define communities? There's the research community, but there's also local communities, there's indigenous communities, and making sure we're really thoughtfully engaging across those different types of communities as early as possible, while recognizing that there's a huge cost to time commitments to engage in something like this when there's no guarantee that it will be funded. That's something that comes up time and time again, and we're trying to really carefully work through. So that's another example where I would say wherever people have kind of opportunities through existing relationships and collaborations to engage in conversations around what PANGEA might contribute or what people would like to see from PANGEA. That's something where we're spending a lot of time trying to coordinate different meetings with different people to engage in those different conversations in different ways. So as an example, beyond those big workshops, we're also going to be coordinating a conversation with an indigenous community in Panama remotely, right? Because we don't have enough funding to do all of this in person, but to start that conversation in a way to share enough information as early as possible about what PANGEA is so that people can make a decision as to whether or not they'd like to be involved, and if so, how. I'm seeing some questions come in through the chat. So let's see. Yes. Oh, so for the question from Emilio, we will be at ATBC, but yeah, I think so the reason we chose to do a webinar here through ESA was because ESA happened so late in the year and we wanted to connect with members of the ESA community early. So I think that's actually a great idea. And I've been in touch with the ATBC coordinators, and maybe what I could do is try to see if we could do a similar webinar with the ESA community early, or sorry, the ATBC community early. And then Natalia, working groups and how to join them. Yes. So the working groups, let me pull that slide up again quickly. So these are our working groups. And one of the things I'll say is that whoops, sorry. Here we go. We have these working group topics. These working groups are what currently exist. We're going to have a big meeting in a couple weeks in Washington, D.C., where we're actually going to reevaluate, are these the right thematic topic areas? Should we separate them out into more? Should some of them be merged? So we have a lot of people who are currently exploring the science gaps, the feasibility questions, kind of what PANGEA can do in the context of these different topic areas. We have co-leads leading those working groups. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing from them in April. And after April, we'll have another chance to kind of reevaluate. If you're interested in being involved, please, please, please reach out to Isaac, or there's the co-leads names are listed on the website. I think we need to get their emails up there still too. But if you'd like to reach out to them directly, you can be in touch with me or Isaac to get their contact information, or just let us know you're interested in being involved and we can put you in touch with them. Some of them, we're doing a very decentralized approach to working groups because this is something I really want the community to be engaged in this with a level of buy-in that's deep enough that it's not just, it's, you know, if this is going to be successful, it can't just be a small leadership team defining what this is going to be. It needs to be a community effort. And so each of those working group co-leads are kind of developing their own process and approach. And they have sometimes weekly or bi-weekly meetings. Some of them are starting with slightly smaller groups and then having more broader town halls to engage a larger community. And then some people are having huge groups. So if you want to get involved, the first thing to do is to fill out the get involved form. But the second thing to do is if there's one of these working groups you want to get involved with, email Isaac, email me, or email our email address, the Tropical Forest email address. Isaac, can you drop that email into the chat as well? And please let us know which working group you'd like to be involved with, and we can connect you directly with the co-leads. You can also put that information in the get involved form, which Isaac checks regularly. Does that answer your question, Natalia?
Yes, thank you so much.
Great, you're welcome. All right, and then Evandro, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. Great, we're happy to hear that. The more engagement, the better. We really, I mean, I want to emphasize that this is something where there's no guarantee this will get funded. And so we recognize that there's a lot of cost associated with contributing time to participating in this. We're trying to really be flexible and offer a lot of different ways to get engaged and provide feedback. So in addition to getting involved through the working groups, there's also an opportunity to fill out a request for information form on our website. Isaac, maybe you could drop the link to that in the chat as well. What that is a very open-ended form where you can write, you know, I think PANGEA should focus on this question. I think it should focus on this site. I think there's this opportunity. I think you know, I'm concerned with how you're approaching this aspect of the campaign. We want to hear from you all, and we really want to take that information into consideration as we develop this white paper. So please fill that out. There's no structure to that. You can share whatever you'd like to with us. And then in addition, we'll have a draft of the white paper that we'll be making public in September. And so there'll be time, we'll make sure we blast, you know, Twitter, LinkedIn, email, our email mailing list. If you want to get on our mailing list, please fill out that get involved form and let us know. And when that draft is available in September, there'll be a month for people to review it and provide feedback. And we really want to make sure we take feedback into account at that stage as well and update the white paper to the best of our ability to make sure that reflects the goals and desires of the research community. I think there was another question too about venues and dates for the South America meeting. So the Manaus workshop is in partnership with another group that's organizing that. We'll be a part of that. That's going to be the third week of May. And then there's going to be a smaller workshop in June 3rd and 4th in Peru. And we're really hoping to emphasize participation of people from Amazonian countries or Central and South American countries outside of Brazil, since the Manaus meeting will be very Brazil focused. And so if you or someone you know who is from Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, or another country in the area, please let us know. So that workshop is again in June 3rd through 4th in Lima, Peru. And we're still actively getting organized for that too. The tricky thing about 1 year to scope means that we're just constantly trying to keep up with our own process. So please bear with us, but please don't hesitate to reach out to us too if you have questions about the process or suggestions. Any other questions or thoughts?
Hey, Elsa. This is
Hey.
Yeah, so first, thank you for the explanation. It was very clear. And there are many opportunities that we can work with here, and I really appreciate that. So my question comes because, well, understanding that this is going to be a collaborative work and we will need more people to get involved and also institutions to join and put effort and time on this. My question is, what are the requisites for a research institution to get involved in this project? I mean, is it the logistic to go to the regions they research? Is it the type of ecosystems they work in? Or is it the number of plots they manage?
There's nothing that specific as a prerequisite. So, for example, that partner list I shared with you, the way to get on that list is really from kind of reaching out to you, or you reaching out to us and identifying a possible synergy. So, for example, there's the Andes Flux network is listed there, and there's several flux towers that are developed or currently being developed across this climatic gradient in the Peruvian Amazon, and then coordinated with one or a couple in kind of Western Brazil. And that's an example where if this were to get funded, one or some of those could be part of a super site area, but there's still no guarantee. So again, this is really about starting conversations to identify and contribute to the development of the science questions that are important and different existing efforts that would engage with or be synergistic with a campaign like this if it were to get funded. I wish I could give you a better answer, but the nature of this process is very fuzzy, in part because it's just a scoping process, and there's no guarantee that either of these will get funded, and so we have to kind of proceed with all of that in mind. But I would not say there's no hard and fast criteria to be involved at all. And in fact, the more the merrier. We really want to hear from as many different people in the community. I think the one criteria is as being interested and motivated to engage. And again, that engagement can look different depending on what you have the time for, or what people on your team have the time for. Does that help answer your question? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. I think we do have time for another quick question if anyone has one. Otherwise, the last thing I'll say is just to emphasize, yeah, Olufemi?
Yeah, so I was wondering if, because I was trying to look at the form and then I discovered that it's only Africa, South America, and Asia that are predominantly involved. So do you actually need the input of those in North America? Like, basically, yeah.
Great
And then,
question.
yeah, and then the last one is, what happens after the submission of the white paper in November?
Yeah, very good questions. So the first question, why do we even need input from folks in North America or Europe when this is in the tropics? I mean, it would be a NASA-funded campaign, and NASA is a US federal agency. And so the fact that it would be funded by a US federal agency inherently means that there are US scientists and researchers involved in the process, which is where we're coming from. But we really do want to use it as an opportunity to center and focus on researchers from the region. And there's, on our website too, you'll notice there's a statement about NASA funding, which is a really important caveat to mention. So NASA funding and a lot of federal funding has stipulations about who can and cannot be funded. And it does restrict the ability to fund people from non-US institutions, which is why we're actively also spending this year trying to identify additional funding sources that would, if this gets funded, that would support students and faculty and researchers from the tropics. So that's one additional thing beyond the science. If you or if anybody has any insights, we're spending a lot of time focusing on pursuing those opportunities as well, and making sure that's a key part of what gets written into the white paper. So I want to emphasize that, but it's a really great question. In terms of the process, that is something where, so once the white paper gets submitted at the end of this year, there will be a team of folks at NASA that will review that, NASA headquarters that will review that and make a decision about whether ARID or PANGEA get funded or some combination of both or neither. Let's say PANGEA gets funded, then there would be about a year or so where a science definition team would be formed. And that science definition team there'd be an opportunity for folks involved in the scoping process to engage, either be on or engage with that science definition team. And that would be the period at which information put into the white paper would really be taken and kind of acted upon. So that would be a point at which sites would really be more narrowly defined. The sensors that would be the focus area would be defined. The logistics, the planning, the funding would be really at that time identified and determined in more detail. And then there would be competed science calls, most likely. So NASA would put out a lot of solicitations for funding. We're talking to National Science Foundation, DOE, other funding agencies about similar solicitations, also funding support from the European counterparts and potentially other funding sources to support work. So again, this is an opportunity to support the definition of a research priority that could influence a lot of funding calls that would be coming out over the next 10 years or so. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. So that means those in North America can actually get involved.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, so those in North America, those in Europe would be able to get involved through their respective funding agencies, right, directly. And then the real question too is how can we make sure that funding supports folks in the region in a direct way? And that's something we're actively exploring as well through different funding mechanisms, partnerships with governments, partnerships with local institutions, et cetera.
Okay. Okay. It's cool. Thank you.
Yeah. I think we're at time and overtime now, but I really want to thank you all for joining us today. And again, this was recorded and we'll make sure we post this on our website once we get the recording from ESA. And I would highly encourage you all to reach out with questions, feedback, comments, suggestions. We are very interested in hearing from the research community. So thank you very much. And yeah, thanks to Isaac as well for helping out as always. Take care, everyone.